All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the webinar, Rejuvenate Your Corporate Consolidation and Reporting Processes. My name is Sarah, and this is my colleague, Melissa. And we're today in our office in Malvern. I'll be your moderator for today, and Melissa will help monitor the chat for the webinar. Our presenters are Friedrich Glugsberger, Senior Engagement Manager, and Van Vu, Senior Finance Transformation Lead from Enowa. A little bit about our speakers. Friedrich has over 25 years of SAP experience, leading implementations, rollouts, and continuous improvement initiatives. His experience in participating or actively managing technology, best-driven transformation, and Six Sigma initiatives has allowed him to gain considerable experience on leveraging technology to drive superior process performance and quality. Van has more than 10 years of experience in finance, accounting, and SAP. She has held roles in multiple areas, including financial reporting, financial systems, planning, and joint venture accounting. Their extensive business analysis skills have allowed them to provide exceptional financial and reporting transformation in small teams with big impact with our clients. Now that you know about our speakers, I also want to give you a refresher and a brief overview on Enowa. Enowa is a global SAP Gold partner executing business process transformation projects supported by SAP products. In our 20 years in business, we have 100% repeat business with an incredible strong track record. While we complete large-scale global S4 transformation projects, we have other clients that prefer incremental pragmatic moves. And in today's webinar, we'll discuss one facet of that move, which is focused on finance and reporting. It looks like most people have logged in, so we are ready to get started with our webinar. For the best webinar experience, your audio is muted. We encourage you to submit your questions in the questions area throughout the webinar. This will help us get right into them at the end. Please note this webinar is being recorded. With that, I am going to turn control over to Van, and Friedrich will start us off. So over to you both. Friedrich, we can't hear you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar today. Before we go into the details, I would like to give you a quick outline what we will cover today. So we have two main topics for this presentation. One is we want to talk about the group reporting project that we have worked on, how it was set up, how we organized it, how it was executed, and we want to point out some, key points that made this project a success. So that's the first block of this presentation that I cover, and then after that we're going to go into actually specific solution design for the project that we're talking about. Talking about group reporting as a solution, what we have done there, how we implemented it, how the data integration to reporting worked, and then finally, obviously, we want to answer your questions that you're bringing up during this presentation. Next slide. So this first slide basically gives you a quick overview on the left side what group reporting is all about. So on the lower part, I'm talking about some design aspect. One thing to understand about group reporting, it is not a new solution. It's basically combining everything that SAP has done in the consolidation and consolidated reporting area over the last 20 years. I listed down here some, probably well-known consolidation solutions that SAP had in the past: ECCS, BCS, and BPC. I think there's also another one, FC, that had some influence in developing group reporting. But what it really is basically taking a solution or solutions that's already there and then introducing contemporary digital technologies, in memory technologies, mobility, machine learning, to really come up with a new solution. that is, transforming these processes. It can be deployed on premise and in the cloud. So it's really, if you have a digital core that runs, on site, it's really part of the digital core environment. Allows flexible reporting solutions. Again, there's different options. I talked about mobility before. Friori obviously is a mandatory thing for group reporting. You can also do reporting there. There's analysis for Office, which is probably something that most people want to use because it's Excel based in the financial space. And then there's SAP Analytics Cloud is another option to report your data. It also has, in the version that we implemented, so we used actually 1909 FSP02 for this implementation. It really has drastically increased in terms of functionality. Rather than just providing statutory, consolidation functionality, there is now metrics consolidation in there that allow you to really consolidate data by different dimensions. For example, profit centers and segments. In addition, there is flexible rollups now available in 1909. There's something called new reporting logic that allow you to really create flexible hierarchies on different dimensions and report off your data. Another aspect of this design was really the integration. So SAP was saying, we really want to make sure that we're relying on backend master data. That means group reporting really relies on your backend master data, in terms of company code, cost centers, accounts, profit centers, segments. So you don't have to replicate this data. They're all basically taken from the backend solution and then used in a group reporting solution. One thing to point out, so obviously, some predictive modeling functionality. I think I mentioned machine learning before. That's also built in. And all this package that you get here when you start our implementation is actually built into a list of best practices that really can be used to start your project quickly and accelerate it. So what is the value of group reporting? So the value is really this whole concept of continuous accounting and close operation. Since all the documents that you produce in your universal journal in S/4HANA are being actually transferred one by one, you can now basically release the data anytime you want. They're all time-stamped and brought into group reporting. That means start the closing process even prior when you do flash reporting. You can bring the data already over and see how your results, consolidated results actually develop throughout the months. Obviously, consistent and reliable reporting, one version of the truth. It's one data set that goes all the way back to the origin. And then in total, obviously, I think one thing that we really found at the client that we worked with is that they used an old, outdated Hyperion solution. And if they did actually plan actual comparison in the Hyperion consolidation engine. And when variances occurred, really going back and finding out what's going on was very cumbersome. The actual closing process has not been really shortened, but the way of analyzing the data has, really caused a substantial improvement of the closing process and then, auditing processes as well. So again, you have full integrability going back into the original system and seeing the data there. To the right side, I'm giving a quick idea what we did at this client. We talked about the long-term corporate performance management vision. You see that anything in blue, highlighted in blue, is basically the initial adoption, and anything that's in orange here is basically subsequent. So before we really got going with the project, we talked about how the long-term vision of the solution is going to look like. And you see that we had basically IBP for volume planning, integrated business planning, more on the supply chain side, going into SAP Analytics Cloud from a planning standpoint, using actually integrated financial planning content that's already available in SAP Analytics Cloud. That's something we want to use as a subsequent project. And then really feeding the data back and forth. It means anything that happened on an actual basis is going to go up there. And we would then do the planning approach and feed the planner data back into the core solution. Again, group reporting can extract data from the plan table and the actual tables and really consolidate this information. So group reporting is really the back-end engine to bring it all together. On the lower end, there's also some actually really good tools available that allow you to bring in plan and actual data if you do not have all your entities in S/4HANA. So there's flexible uploads, there's actually an API functionality we talk about a little bit later in this presentation, what's available in more detail. And then there's something that's called the SAP Group Reporting Data Collection application. And this is something that really runs in the cloud. It's a really sophisticated way of getting data in, mapping them and feeding them automatically, fully integrated into group reporting. It also allows you to create forms and make adjustments to data. And it's all supposed to be traceability. Traceability is there, full traceability if you need to. And then to the right hand, there's really two reporting solutions in the core solution that you have. Obviously, you can always go back and also report in the SAP Analytics Cloud. But we have Fiori, the data analysis, which I think we found out is best used really by the people that work in the corporate accounting departments to analyze the data and prepare them throughout the closing process. It's kind of a pivot table concept. And then SAP Analysis for Office 2.8, which is really a very sophisticated Excel-based, front end that allows you to really create your, schedules, reports, and packages that you need. Next slide, please. So let me talk about the roadmap for this project. So the project had, mainly European and US entities with a total number of 4 consolidation units. About half of them were basically in S/4HANA, and then the rest were in 2 other accounting systems, ECC and Dynamics. So the project was laid out, using Activate, the typical methodology in these 4 phases. The total duration was about 32 weeks. We started the project in February. And you see these green boxes down here. We defined the term go live ready. I want to talk a little bit about that. Go live ready for us meant that we had the solution to a point where all the settings in a production environment are ready to really extract data from other systems and load them into the production system. This was actually planned for August financial data. Where we currently are is we basically have just started last week in loading all historical data into the production environment. These data were tied out in a testing environment with the opening balances for 2021. And then again, we went to all the periods from all the different accounting systems, tied out the data, made sure they actually reconciled back to the Hyperion consolidation system and got them ready for loading. And that's currently being done. So by the end of next week, we expect to be actually at a point where then data would not be actually reconciled no longer in the quality environment. We would go straight into production environment. As for the actual go live, we sat around the table. We talked about what's a good time to go live. I think the decision was made to, run Hyperion until the end of the year, run group reporting in parallel, close out this fiscal year in Hyperion, and then start closing in group reporting January 2022. Had also some other ramifications here. The company we worked with just did a large acquisition with 17 more entities that we also now starting to integrate for a January 2022 close. Let me talk a little bit about the project itself. So prepare phase. Just a couple of key items that I want to point out here. Obviously, having a vision in mind was important. We really want to know where we want to be in the long run, and then how we're gonna get there. And obviously, there's a couple of things we had to do, to create interim bridges and solutions to get there at the end. But we plan to start actually the SEC planning implementation in 2022, which some of the components that we have implemented here would obviously go away and being replaced. Also, the company plans to go, really full-blown S/4HANA in the next 2-3 years. So a couple of data integration points that we're showing. We're probably going to be replaced with the S/4HANA Universal Journal. And again, this is really where group reporting has its full strengths, where you can release data almost instantly whenever you need to. Another thing that I want to point out, that we spent a fair amount of time during the prepare phase, the first 2 to 3 weeks, really going through everything that is currently done in the consolidation reporting environment to make sure that we're not going to miss anything as we prepare actually for the fit gap workshops. And then if you want to use the data collection application in group reporting, It's strongly recommended that you really get trained up on the business technology platform. It's a cloud-based solution. You need to get an account. The application is actually installed up there. You need to subscribe for it. And then there's a fair amount of work actually to be done to integrate it to the backend system if you have an on-premise environment. Again, something, if you would plan to do that, we recommend that you really start the first day looking into this integration and setup. Explore phase, about 5 weeks. Again, we went to all the fit gap workshops and delta design workshops to make sure that we cover all the areas of the solution. One thing that's also important that we felt need to start, immediately is the data mapping. Data mapping actually took us quite some time and had to extend it a couple times going into the realize phase, although we wanted to get it done by the end of the explore phase. It's just one of the areas you need to watch out for. Again, as soon as you can, get it started and work on it. Going to the realize phase, really, 2 sets of workshops, one going through and using the best practices and really showing the solution to the client and then identifying all the backlog items. So we've used best practices here, and we're going to talk a little bit more about later in this presentation, which really allowed us to get this project done in the short time frame. We would expect if best practices are not being used, that the timeline would be substantially longer. Then obviously the integration and user acceptance testing. Usually in project you have 2 integration test cycles. After really doing detailed planning, looking to the sprint approach in the realize phase, we decided to actually break it down into 2 phases. One was the baseline build phase, which was ended with the integration test, and then the final build phase, which was ended with the user acceptance testing. The difference between the baseline and the final is really the readiness that we wanted to create with the baseline solution. We knew that there's a fair amount of data migration work to be done, and we needed something that we can base our historical data loads on. And that was basically the baseline solution. So the baseline solution built everything out that we needed to really start with the data migration and actually the report migration approach early to get it completed on time. Again, 32 weeks in duration. Project is basically go live ready at this point. Next slide. So I want to talk a bit about the project organization. Again, we used the typical workstream approach from the Activate methodology, which you see on the left lower corner here. And try to organize it according to a group reporting project. And a couple of highlights here that I want to point out that were really important to make this a success in a rather quick project. One was we had leadership commitment and involvement throughout the project. Interesting story is that there was not one steering committee meeting as part of this project. The leadership was involved really from the get-go in our weekly status meetings, in all the design sessions, in most of the design sessions based on availability. And we had actually set up weekly, we call it like stand-up meetings going into the realize phase with the leadership team. We had 15 to 30-minute discussion where we talked about how the project is going and whether we needed anything. There was a couple of risks that came up where we needed additional resources for report creation. There was some key decisions we had to make. Again, it was all executed rather quickly, so no lengthy preparation for steering committee meetings. That was really important here. Second thing, we had a dedicated executive committee. An executive committee for this project was really kind of focusing on integration aspects. When you put group reporting in place, it's not like the standalone system that sits there in the background. There's a lot of integration aspects you need to consider, especially master data and upstream processes. There were some process changes that we had to drive in the S/4HANA and ECC systems to really make sure that data are properly prepared and flowing into group reporting. And this committee was built by 2 people basically based on business processes on the business side and then the system. And again, involved throughout the project. If there were some changes required, we discussed it and decisions were made quickly whether these things can be implemented or not. And the third component from the top here It's probably the most important one, business process ownership. We established a business process owner hierarchy of all the different areas, corporate accounting, segment accounting in the different regions, tax accounting, and then financial planning and analysis. Subject matter experts were actually brought to the project, and we had clear defined decision hierarchies if something had to be brought up and escalated. Also worked very well on this project. Going down now to the lower part from a project execution, application design and configuration. The main work stream here obviously is data management and solution testing, and then the application design. Dedicated resources are key. So we had one of the managers actually that was working on the consolidation solution at Hyperion for the last like 10, 15 years, was completely removed from the daily business and moved into this project. Very beneficial. And we also had one fully dedicated IT resource on the project that worked with us to make sure configuration is done, integration aspects are being covered, and documentation handover is being conducted throughout the project. And then finally, one thing that the solution actually did is, I think the user base was probably more than tripled, with group reporting. Again, the idea was that we don't have this, Hyperion solution sitting on the side anymore that's only used by small people, and for consolidated results, we really wanted to have, broader acceptance of the solution. So we engaged an OCM team that was client-based, that really, worked on engagement, end user engagement, found out about the differences, did a lot of communication down to the end users, and then obviously delivered the training towards the end of the project. Next slide, please. Next slide. So let me talk a little bit about the explore phase in more detail. So as I mentioned before, we spend a fair amount of time preparing for these workshops in the explore phase. Again, reviewing all the information, setting actually up a best practice-based system so we can demonstrate it, demonstrate the solution. And then, we also talked to, interviewed actually all the different departments and talked about pain points from the current solution. And this also allowed us basically to already identify some potential gaps in the group reporting solution, which we then sort of embedded and prepared in the workshops. So the number 2 here, you basically see the list of 12 initial workshops we conducted during probably a time frame of 2 to 3 weeks at the beginning of the explore phase. There was probably another 10, 15 that we conducted during the Delta design. We really focused on, very specific design topics that sort of came out of this 12 workshops. Going through these workshops, we documented a solution design and then a solution backlog. Solution backlog basically documented all the requirements that we found that we needed to address in addition to using best practice setup. Also, what's important here is that the solution design document wasn't a lengthy written document. It was really, basically taking best practice content and then describing what needs to be changed to make it work for these clients. Some were on the Delta and Gap design workshops. So there was actually a fair amount of decisions we had to drive, what functionality we're going to use, how we're going to integrate, how we're going to report. So what we did is to really accelerate this process and get it done in 2 weeks. So we reached out to the stakeholders, we had discussions, we discussed decision criteria for the decision, and then we prepared actually decisions before we went into the workshops by providing pros and cons and recommendations, which worked very well, which allowed us basically to get this explore phase done in about 5-week time frame. Also important is that we got probably within a week or 2 after the design phase, the explore phase, we got sign-off from all the stakeholders that we can move forward with the solution. Next slide, please. So this is a quick snapshot of the backlog that we established. Again, we used Smartsheets, which was a really great tool for this project to collaborate with the users. So you see here the backlog, a couple of sample items that we put on here. Again, to the left, one thing we did is we thought about how we need to classify and organize the sprint log, actually the backlog, because we had about more than 100, 120 items at the end. and we wanted to make sure that we can organize them accordingly as we groom them actually and get them ready for the realize phase. So group them together to meaningful packages as we then, develop the sprint phase during the realize phase. Couple things to the right-hand side. That's number 2 here. Obviously, every story that we identified had to have an owner. It had to be a business process owner. They identified exactly what they needed. They also identified what the definition of done means. That means what we had to demonstrate back to the business that we can do to get the sign-off. And then we had also used a Moscow, typically agile, classification that basically allowed us to really focus on the top items and then go down as we built the solution out for the first release and address must and should item first before we went to other items in the list. And again, this backlog was also groomed and signed off at the end of the explore phase before we moved into the realize phase. Next slide, please. So this is actually the sprint plan that we put together and executed. You see that the realize phase took about 18 weeks. There was, as I mentioned before, 2 phases in the sprint plan. One was the baseline solution build that really allowed us then to start the data migration to reporting migration. And then the final build basically that came after the integration test that really addressed anything in addition. A couple things to point out here is obviously security. Security was not discussed in or worked on during the realize phase when we did the baseline solution build. That was really, put in at the end. And then, a couple of, additional things we did. We had 2 cash flow statements. I think we started working on the external ones in the baseline solution build, and then the internal ones were actually done in the final solution build. Again, baseline solution build was really necessary for us to start data migration, have the structures and everything ready, and then also start the report migration. There was about 150 report packages, schedules, that we needed actually to migrate at the end. And the sooner we could start it, the faster we could get it done. From an execution of the baseline solution build, you see basically here that we really focused, getting all the backlog items together. So we started basically on the best practice confirmation at the beginning, ledger setup, version setup, any additional master data we had to do. There was obviously some discussions how, ECC or, additional accounting entities we used. There was a dynamics section in place being added into the S/4HANA master data sets, so we can use them in group reporting. Financial statement versions were discussed, actually, and FS items. What needs to be added in addition to obviously the best practice content that we leveraged. So Sprint 2 now really, you see the color-coded boxes on the left lower corner. Basically there is anything that's dark blue is basically done for all entities, and then the yellow ones is actually the S/4HANA entities, and then we had the green ones for ECC and Dynamics entities. And then in addition, anything that was done in blue was basically making sure we also have the plain data integration and forecasting integration established to group reporting. So Sprint 2 basically focused on really starting to build up some numbers in the system, loading opening balances for about 17 entities that were the number of S/4HANA entities, and then starting to release universal journal data month by month and trying to run to the consolidation process. FX translations, validations, and so forth, just to make sure that the reported data that we bring in the data monitor are fine. At the same time, we started working on some core reporting packages we needed actually to tie out the data. Again, there was a basic set of balance sheet and P&L developed in the second sprint, and then some additional reporting packages for statistical items and so forth we needed. Sprint 3 then really focused on getting additional data into the system. Again, via manual adjustments postings, via data forms, statistical data, and we also started working on the initial cash flow information. One thing I want to point out here, you see basically in sprint number 3 and 4, there's one bullet is actually sort of stricken out So when we came out of the explore phase, we wanted to use the GRDC. I think I mentioned this before. It's called the data collection application. It's a cloud-based application, but we found out that in the version that we were using, that the logging, error logging, and traceability was very limited. So the client actually decided not to use it. So we basically had to switch around and went back to the flexible upload. That was the decision, and create some additional tools here. Sprint 4, as you see the green box, we did the ECC mapping and program for extraction and then the mapping. We also worked on dynamics and then some additional items and tested the flex uploads. Simultaneously, I think we kind of split the team in two halves. We worked also on the plant data integration. So the plant data integration really covered budget information, monthly forecast information, and strategic planning information that were loaded into the system as well for comparability. And then the final sprint before we went into integration testing was really, the final consolidation steps, intercompany eliminations, consolidation of investments, and so forth. We also actually developed some processes, template processes to do investments and divestitures in group reporting, something the client asked for. Again, I mentioned before that they are actually in a heavy acquisition mode, so they wanted to make sure that group reporting is ready to accept these new acquisitions as they come on board. Final build, I think I mentioned before, anything that was left over. Security was another of these topics. So security was actually built twofold. One is we made the decision that once we go live with group reporting, that the consolidation process will remain in corporate control, in corporate accounting. Security was set up that way, but in addition, I think there was also some discussions already that eventually the segment actually would do their own consolidation process, loading the data into the group reporting system and then running to at least the data monitor, doing the currency translations and so forth. So security was built around the idea that this can be done subsequently to a go live. Again, 18 weeks, realize phase was completed by user acceptance testing before we start going into the deploy phase. I want to hand it now over to Van, who is going to cover the solution design in more detail.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to talk about the overall solution design for group reporting. But before I jump into the overall solution, I want to talk about the key objectives that we want to talk about in terms of what I achieve for the overall design. The first key objective that I want to point out, we want group solution to be an overall solution across the organization. So not just for the consolidation team or the finance team, but any department that uses consolidated data would eventually report data off of group reporting. So this embraces the group reporting concept, if you will, as the single source of the truth. Ensure that everybody is reporting off of the same source and that the numbers are final and all from the same location. And that we want to achieve in this project is really maximize the group reporting dimensions in a way that would be helpful for the client. So we learned that from the beginning, the Hyperion dimensions were very linear, very single dimensional, in which they're stacked in a way that cannot be combined to do flexible reporting. What we found out from group reporting is that for the data dimension, what we want to do is really dimensions up, create alternate hierarchies in a way that it's flexible enough to accommodate for external management and ad hoc reporting. So in a way, we also get views at the local entity and also views for the consolidated group or company. And then finally, since we're integrating data into, we want to make sure that it's as much as possible so that it can flow into group reporting so that we can eventually close the books sooner and then eventually, of course, report on that data as soon as possible. So on the same token, we want to make sure that the audit trail and the traceability of the data that we load into group reporting is there. Make sure that every single record that we loaded is accounted for, that it's consistent, and the quality of data is traceable enough that if audits were to come up, someone can go back and trace back the entries to the Rejuvenate. So this was, a few objectives, key objectives that we had in mind for the overall solution.
Can you turn off your webcam? I think we have some connection issues you're breaking off. Maybe we understand you better if you do that.
Is this better?
Let's see. Let's try it.
Okay. Sounds good. All right, so these are the key objectives, as I mentioned. Now we'll jump into the scope and solution for the group reporting solution. So the scope is, I'm just going to give you a context here for group reporting. Overall, we're working with a 1909 on-premise system, and we're also introducing Fiori tiles as a way to process consolidated data and run consolidation tasks. So Fiori was a new requirement or a new tool for the client. They actually needed Enowa's help in setting up the Fiori tiles and making sure that all of the tiles for group reporting are there. In addition to that, when we started to work on security, Enowa stepped in and helped the client to make sure that we've created all the roles necessary to do integration testing. So in that point, Fiori was a brand new tool, but was simply able to overcome some of the learning curves through the help of Enowa's experts on Fiori. The other thing that we want to mention for the scope is that we have 34 entities. Half of them were in S4 and the other half were in ECC and Dynamics. For ECC and Dynamics, looking ahead in the long-term solution is that these entities will eventually migrate to S4HANA. So some of the data integration planning and solution design here is going to be temporary and eventually going to be moved into S4HANA. So for role-based model, we want to talk about some of the security design around group reporting. We want to make sure that people that have existing roles in Hyperion will retain that same access and same processes moving into group reporting. And then also for phase 2, we want to make sure that whatever we design for group reporting factors in the fact that eventually the planning process will be moved into SAC planning. And that will also be an interim process for the planning team. But at the same time, the solution has to be molded and meshed with the group reporting project. So this is the context for the phase 1 solution. And what we did actually is throughout the workshops, we really try to hit the note that using SAP's best practices is the best way to go, as some of that content, master data, consolidation steps are already provided in best practice. So we took the, on the right-hand side, a listing of all the best practices related to group reporting into the workshops, sat down at a round table and talked about all of the options that are available. So what we ended up with is the 3 on the top of the list is what we have adopted for the project. So the 1SG is the core-to-core financial consolidation for running consolidations. Then we also adopted the matrix and plan consolidation as well to make sure that we have the alternate hierarchies in place, not only for actuals, but for planned data. Now, other best practices were considered as well, the 3 at the bottom, but those were marked, for a later date, but were considered when we're talking about benefits in terms of transferring data and also predictive consolidation. It was important here that we drill down into the best practices and realize the benefits of having content already provided by SAP. Best ways to, not start from scratch and really utilize things that have already been built and maybe just modify a few things here and there to meet the customer's needs. So this is the scope for phase 1, and just going to move on now to the data, to the consolidation process. So the consolidation process in group reporting breaks down the process into 4 steps. It's a continuous process that can run sequentially and also go back to the very beginning, depending on how much data we want to integrate, and also any consolidations or late adjustments that can come in after the books have been closed. So in the prepare phase, this is all about master data. So master data refers to all the entities and all the consolidated accounts within group reporting. From here, also want to note that for the best practices, we considered, taking the consolidation chart of accounts from the best practices and really try to see where there is a fit or a match along the way, and really just create any additional accounts and remove any accounts that we didn't need, and utilize the hierarchy that are already built and already there. And at the same time, master data, we looked at different scenarios in which we would invest and divest an entity, make sure that we have a complete set of data before we integrate information into group reporting. In the collect phase, we looked at several different options to integrate data. Of course, for SAP S/4HANA, we looked at the release of Universal Journal, and that is definitely something that we really liked in terms of seamless integration between data from S4 and into group reporting. And the discussion really happens during the workshops around what we do with external data. And that external data can exist outside, which is ECC and Dynamics. And the options that we want to discuss there is the group reporting data collection app, which Friedrich mentioned a while earlier, the flexible upload, and the API. Those will be discussed in the next few slides, but at the end of the day, when we collect our data and integrate that data into group reporting, we always want to make sure that we validate it, make sure that it fits into our controls, and that the data is sound and consistent and complete. The next step in the consolidation process is to consolidate the data. So this area surrounds processes relating to intercompany eliminations and manual journal entries as well. We also discuss things like consolidation of investments. So in case we have scenarios where investments have a minority interest, or even if it's wholly owned at 100%, what these steps would look like in the financial statements is key. And what we did here is really also use best practices consolidation steps. Very little was done to the tasks that were provided in the best practices to really meet the customer's needs. And then finally, when we look at the analyze phase, it's all about reporting and analytics. So how can we report the data that we've already collected and consolidated in group reporting? For analyze, we are going to talk about analysis for Office and Fiori, but at the end of the day, it's also how you slice and dice the data. So can we get views of local entities and also at a group level? And can we also pull in additional details and dimensions if needed to report on other information that might not be included in the financial statements, like statistical items? So this kind of wraps up the consolidation steps in group reporting. And the reason it's important is because we lay out the groundwork for a lot of the sprint planning, playbacks, training materials based on these steps, make sure that we've covered all of the solution items for group reporting from beginning to end. From a data management and integration perspective, we really sat around and discussed what kind of data we would need in terms of doing analysis and reporting. So the number one thing that we wanted to hold is actuals and planning data in group reporting. And folks also want to do a year-over-year analysis. So with that said, in group reporting, we've built actuals and planning using consolidation versions to actually hold those data sets and use that reporting dimension to do the reporting comparison. For the preservation of one-year historical data, what we decided was going back to December 2020 and loading the December balance sheet, and then consolidating each month in 2021 up to the current period. That gives folks that a whole year to work with, when they do their year-over-year comparison between 2021 and 2022 once they go live. And then, of course, we have how we integrate data into group reporting. The various methods that we discussed is release of a universal journal, a definite solution for the S4 entities. The discussion around the non-S4 entities was around how we want to put the data in seamlessly, what the adoption would look like in terms of development and configuration, and then also what kind of audit logs and audit trails would be available in case we need to go back and reconcile the data that's loaded. And then finally, the consideration for closing is also important because we don't want to get hung up on just loading data. We want to reach the timeline to where we're able to consolidate it and provide time for analysis and reporting as soon as possible. So this is a summary of the data management and integration objectives. In the next few slides, we're going to talk about the different methods that I've discussed. The different methods really is based on whether the entity is in S4 or not. So for the S4 entity, we already talked about release of the universal journal. So this means that this is real-time release, it's continuous close, and it has a high amount of data that's being transferred from S4. So this is as real-time as it gets because we can do many releases during close, and there's virtually no risk of duplicating documents along the way. Unfortunately, not all entities are in S4HANA. So with the non-S4HANA entities, we debated using the flexible upload, data collection app, and the API. The one that we ended up using is the flexible upload. It really worked well for us because there was hardly any development or configuration that was required. Right out of the box, we're able to use it with the financial data from December 2020 to rebuild history, and also load that periodic data for 2021 that I talked about. And then finally, the flexible upload also allows us to load statistical data as well. So, anything from tons sold to any, earnings per share metrics can also be loaded through the flexible upload. The other two options were also on the table. We talked about the data collection app and the API. The collection app really is a cloud-based tool that allows us to enter in information, financial or non-financial, into group reporting, has data mapping capabilities, and then the API is an automated way of feeding the data into group reporting. Both of these options weren't a good fit, at least for this project, and especially for the API, because we know that eventually some of these companies will be moved into S4HANA. So the development cost and effort just wasn't justified based on the long-term vision and plan. I'm just going to quickly go into the ECC design aspect here. So what we did for ECC is actually picked up a program that we've already had for another client and another solution. And we've recycled that program in a way that we've also modified and adapted it to the client's needs. So it's really just a two-step process to extract the data, building from several different components in SAP, such as profit center accounting and assets, GL. Those components make up an extraction file, which later gets pushed into a mapping engine. The mapping engine reads the ECC data and converts into group reporting elements to finally load into the flexible upload and in group reporting. So the benefit here is that we already had something ready to go, meaning this program was utilized before and it was easy to adjust and adapt it to the client. We can simply do this again in another group reporting time frame where it is as easy as just lifting and shifting it to another ECC program. And then along the way, we have several different reports and logs that allow you to see the data being transformed. So from the point of when it is converted into group reporting elements, you can see what the extracted elements look like and what the mapping items look like after the mapping has been performed. And then also additional functionalities here is to default certain items that are specific to group reporting in case we have special scenarios to default certain characteristics. And then Dynamics. Dynamics is interesting because it comes from a flat file originally, but the same concepts and same steps apply in Excel. It's basically a 4-step process, very intuitive, goes through from step 1 all the way to step 4 to import the data, convert the data, and also create the data file so that it's ready for uploading to group reporting. What you don't see on the screen here is that we also have separate tabs which allow you to see how that data is transformed. So when it's extracted, you can see that metrics as well, how many records were pulled, how many were converted, and finally what was loaded. And at each of the line items that eventually get loaded into group reporting, there are error and warning messages that allow you to see any discrepancies, any mapping errors, and reconcile that before it goes into group reporting. Eventually, as we said, this goes into the flexible upload format and loads the data in to group reporting in a periodic format. For plan data, this is a very big utility program that we've created. Really just breaks down planning data in a way that we can plan not only by cost centers, accounts, but also at a consolidated level. It relies on actuals being pulled from analysis for office to use as a baseline to make up plan data. We have this tool here where the client can simply plan their entities either at a single entity level or for the entire organization. So instead of running through the entire process, they can also just plan a small piece of the organization. There are settings in here that allow you to default certain items that need to be in the load. And then of course, planning isn't just a one-time thing. There could be multiple loads and iterations during the planning process. This utility factors that into consideration in that the data does not get duplicated, in that we also consider suppressing zeros as well to make sure that the data does not, at least makes it to group reporting in a complete manner. Analytics, we mentioned before, analysis for office and for Fiori. Analysis for office gives you 2 additional ribbons at the top, if you will, to create and connect reports to the group reporting data source. So if folks are familiar with reporting in Excel, this is really cool because they can actually look at all the data using a familiar look and feel like pivot table options where they can drag and drop dimensions from group reporting to create the report. This report in Excel gets refreshed, instantly when you click the refresh button. So along the consolidation process, whenever data is still moving and numbers are still being finalized, there's always a refresh option to make sure that you have the latest and greatest numbers. And in Fiori, we found that the tool is best used for ad hoc analysis, where if you want to look at a certain balance in, let's say, the balance sheet, you're able to jump through to the actual document in Fiori and look at line items and see the debits and credits of that balance. So with that said, for the client, I'd say 99% of the reporting happens in Excel. So the transition from using the Hyperion solution and also reporting in Excel allows analysis for Office to be very user-friendly and familiar to folks who already are familiar with the Excel pivot table functionality. And here's just a quick look at all the functionalities within 1909 and 2020. So in 1909, we already talked about the new reporting logic and the data collection app. In 2020, SAP really changed their game by improving and enhancing some of the data collection app functionality. They've also enhanced and added ability to do substitutions and validations as well, and then additional mapping tools to map from S/4HANA into group reporting. Also, little neat things here is the attachments to make sure that when we have late adjustments or manual adjustments to group reporting, it allows us to attach any documents, Excel, text data to really substantiate some of the posting entries that occur in 2020. So this is just a short list of all the items that are in 2020. Definitely a robust solution compared to 1909, but 1909 is also very powerful in terms of already having the standard consolidation processes built in. All right, so with that said, I'm just going to hand it back to Friedrich to talk about the key takeaways.
Thank you, Van. I think we're running out of time, but let me just go over this real quick. I mean, it's really just a handful of, and there's probably many more implementation considerations for group reporting. I think the number one here on the left upper corner is really leverage best practices. I think we can't encourage it more than it really drives. I mean, there's a really substantial setup in SAP for the best practices. There's about 350 to 400 financial statement reporting items. All the configurations there, all the roll-ups, as Van mentioned before. It is really a good starting point if you want to accelerate the implementation. Going down this list, the second thing is, so there was actually quite a number of items that we got it during the backlog discussions where people really wanted something that we felt should be done in a later phase. Again, make sure that you really focus on a minimum viable product for the initial adoption. So don't drag it out. Get up what you need, replace what you have in place. And build from there. Again, we have probably about 25, 30 items still on the backlog that need to be addressed going forward. Some of them actually will be done with the next release. But again, keep it small, keep it palatable, so you get it done in an expected time frame. Last one in this list is obviously engagement, correct? I can't stretch it more than one of the reasons why we got this down so quickly was really engagement on every level, from the subject matter experts really full-time on the project all the way up to the executive committee that supported this project. On the right-hand side, again, proactively prepare and drive solution decisions. Something that we really worked in our core team. Whenever we went out there, we didn't just put something out there and started talking about it. We really spent a fair amount of time in understanding what we want to get done, what the benefits are, comparing different alternatives, and really provided almost ready-to-go decision documentation to people, especially executive management, so we could move quickly on the project. Obviously, the right balance between transformation risk and value creation. I think this is something where we had a fair amount of discussion. How the processes should actually look in the future. As I mentioned before, is as for the go live, the initial go live, we're going to keep everything in the corporate accounting department, but there is a really idea in the long run to move it out there. We didn't want to obviously burden the project in trying to get the regional controlling departments involved and accounting departments involved and changing all the processes at this time, although preparation has been done as part of the implementation. And then again, carry a common vision for the project. We spent a lot of time actually in the kickoff talking about what you want to get accomplished. We had executives speaking and really carrying a vision. We also doing every opportunity we had. We always talked about a long-term vision, correct, and drive really the implementation back to this long-term vision to make sure that we're following the path to get there at the end. That's it from a presentation standpoint.